All right, welcome. My name is Charlie Forbes. I'm the program coordinator for the Ecology, Spirituality, and Religion program. I certainly see some familiar faces. Don't know if there's any prospective students here or PCC students, but I just want to say welcome to all of you. I'm really pleased to welcome today to have with us Dr. Kate Rigby to speak on her recently new book. It was released in September of 2023, Meditations on Creation in an Era of Extinction. Um, so this is our semester speaker series. These are internal events in the sense that uh, it's really wonderful and a great pleasure to have contemporary scholars that we're able to come invite and have speak and really bring to life some of the things that we're reading and studying in the classroom. So that number one. Number two, these are also kind of outward facing events in that certainly in terms of ecology, spirituality, and religion, hosting these events to bring forth and highlight speakers that are really demonstrating a lot of the work that's being done in this field. Um, so I'll start with that. We have the Dr. Mary Evelyn Tucker and Dr. John Grimm wrote a book, Ecology and Religion, and in it they have a methodological approach to the study of religion and ecology that they call the three R's. It's retrieval, reevaluation, oh my goodness, and I'm blanking, reinterpretation. In any case, my point here is that Professor Rigby's book is very much a demonstration of that, of going back and retrieving this ancient, this art, this genre of the Hexameron, and really reevaluating it and repurposing it for a new context. And Professor Rigby, whose specialty is really in the environmental humanities, eco-criticism, really, we're very grateful to have her here. So as far as the structure of the event, we have about Dr. Rigby is going to speak for about 45 minutes. And then there's going to be some space afterwards for reflections with PCC professor here, Dr. Sean Kelly. So please, I've disabled the chat for now. As you have questions, maybe write them down. There will be time at the end. I'll turn the chat on and we can have a little bit of a dialogue. I'm really also happy to have Dr. Kelly with us here today. Certainly from an ESR perspective, I know him as the foremost expert in our institute on integral ecology and his work with Joanna Macy and the work that reconnects. So very pleased to have his expertise here today and his moderation as well. So I'm just going to introduce Dr. Rigby, and then I'm going to give you the floor. If it's okay, I'm going to read your bio. I think that will be helpful for everyone here today. Okay. We have Professor Dr. Kate Rigby, Fellow of the Australian Academy of the Humanities, is Alexander von Humboldt Professor of Environmental Humanities at the University of Cologne, where she leads a research hub for multidisciplinary environmental studies in the humanities, and visiting scholar in the Research Center for the Environmental Humanities at Bath Spa University. Her research lies at the intersection of environmental, literary, philosophical, historical, and religious studies, with a specialist interest in European Romanticism, ecopoetics, multi-species studies, and disaster studies. She was the inaugural president of the Association for the Study of Literature, Environment, and Culture, and the founding director of the Australia Pacific Forum on Religion and Ecology. A founding co-editor of the journal Philosophy, Activism, Nature, she also co-edited the University Press of Virginia series under the Sign of Nature, and her books include Topographies of the Sacred, The Poetics of Place in European Romanticism, Dancing with Disaster, Environmental Histories, Narratives and Ethics for Perilous Times, Reclaiming Romanticism Towards an Ecopoetics of Decolonization, and Meditations on Creation in an Era of Extinction. Welcome, Dr. Kate Rigby. The floor is yours. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction and for the opportunity to talk with you today about my book. I've actually long been an admirer of the California Institute, and so this is a really nice opportunity to connect with you there. So I'm going to have a go sharing my screen. Let's see how I go. And with this in a moment. Okay, so here we go. So this book was actually a really long time in the making. The seed was sown some 20 years ago when my then colleague at Monash University, Kevin Hart, suggested that I'd like reading Basil of Caesarea's Hexameron, given my budding interest in ecotheology. Well, as you've heard, I'm actually a romanticist by training, and my research previously had focused on late 18th and early 19th century European literature and philosophy. So the only basil I knew was the herb that you put on your salad, and I had absolutely no idea what the Hexameron was. So Kevin went on to explain that Basil's Hexameron was a foundational text in a largely forgotten and surprisingly under-researched genre of Christian literature, consisting of meditations on the biblical six, which is hexa in Greek, days, hemera in Greek, of creation. And as I show in the next slide, this tradition, this genre got going in late antiquity, and it was revived during the Middle Ages, and it made its way into some major poetic works in the Renaissance, and basically petered out in the 17th century. John Milton snuck an Hexameron into Book 7 of Paradise Lost in the voice of the Archangel Gabriel, explaining to Adam how he and everything else had come to be. And the wonderful Thomas Traherne penned an exuberant prose version for the wife of a friend. This was the first Protestant Hexameron. And this was around the middle of the 1700s. But that was pretty much the end of the line, at least in English literature. Apart from a couple of short verse hexamera by mid-20th century Christian poets, Geoffrey Hill and James Macaulay, and Kevin Hart has actually written an essay about their sort of re-engagement with this hexameral tradition. Well, I was completely intrigued, but a whole host of other projects took priority. And it was only in the late 2010s that long dormant seed started germinating. So following my relocation to England to take up Chair of Environmental Humanities at Basil University, and with a book, as you've just heard mentioned, on romantic poetics due out in 2020, I decided that since I was under no immediate pressure to produce yet another scholarly monograph or another half dozen refereed journal articles, I could have the luxury of making this a different kind of book from anything that I'd ever attempted before. We'll have to wait and see whether I succeeded. But my ambition was to write a book for a wider readership. This was not to be, and was not, in fact, an academic book about the hexameral tradition, but rather a creative endeavor to revive it, and indeed to repurpose it, to take up Charlie's terms. In other words, what I wanted to write was my own Hexameron, informed by my own experiences, perspectives, and understandings of the more than human world, and to do so consciously in this perilous moment of ecological calamity and injustice. So having spent a couple of years reading my way into the hexameral tradition and perusing the scant scholarship about it, I started writing in earnest in 2020. Now, as you might recall, that year was notable for the not unanticipated emergence and extremely swift spread of a certain novel virus. But what you might not have noticed was that this was also the year in which the Archbishop of Canterbury recommended for Lenten study Ruth Valerio's ecotheologically oriented monograph, Saying Yes to Life, which, lo and behold, takes the form of an Hexameron, albeit with the crucial inclusion of that all-important seventh day, of which more anon. Well, this nearly derailed my project entirely, since it seemed that dear Ruth had already done what I had in mind. On further reflection, though, I realized that my Hexameron would surely be rather different. It would be more explicitly in conversation with the tradition, for a start, but also differently accented in certain ways. It's both more personal and, I think, more political. And I also record, as you can see from this list, by the way, this is by no means exhaustive. These are just some of the big shots in this tradition. I also record that in the 4th century, there were several major hexamera apart from Basil's, such as those of John Chrysostom and Ambrose of Milan, as indeed there were in the 12th century. So why should I not contribute to the renaissance of the Hexameron in and for the 21st century? So ultimately undaunted, I finally got underway, and what an exciting and enriching journey it took me on. Well, several of the major hexamera, including Basil's, were composed as a series of homilies. And mine too is roughly modeled on the structure of a sermon. Each begins with a personal anecdote, followed by an exegesis of the biblical passage in conversation with earlier hexameral commentators. I then turn to contemporary understandings of the aspect of the natural world said to have been summoned forth on that day, as well as its current plight. And following a critical analysis of the societal drivers of this damage, I conclude with words of encouragement, as every good homily must. Words of encouragement drawn from my conversations with representatives from an array of faith-based environmental or eco-political initiatives from around the world. And I conclude with a little lyrical reflection in my own voice again. And so the next slide highlights some of these. The first day, the summoning of light out of the watery deep, which graciously alternates with abiding darkness. This I read as an invitation to contemplation, attending to the apprehensible whilst honouring the incomprehensible. And this, of course, is a form of contemplative practice which can be found in many religious traditions, including Christianity, as recalled in Aidan Hart's icon of St. Cuthbert and the Otters. And I understand this as a necessary counterpart to sustained activist engagement. If I'd have been able to have an interview with Richard Raw, he would have featured here. I do quote him. His Centre for Contemplation and Action is a kind of touchstone for my reflections on the first day. Well, the second day is, of course, a separation of earth and sky, which I read as referring to the emergence of Earth's atmosphere. And my focus is on the impacts of climate disruption, particularly in Australia and the Pacific region. And this is a wonderful Rabbi Jonathan Karen Black from Melbourne, whom I know personally, who was the founding president of Green Faith Australia. And here he is blowing the Jewish shofar to sound the alarm and call for transformative climate action. The third day is the separation of land and sea and Earth's birthing of plants. And my focus here is on the destruction of the Amazon rainforest. And this photo is of the remarkable Marcia Maria de Oliveira, who is a co-founder of Catholic organization REPAM, the Church in the Amazon, which was founded to work alongside Indigenous peoples to defend their land and culture against extractivist violence. The fourth day is the creation of the celestial luminaries, as they're sometimes referred to, sun, moon, and stars. And my focus here is on pollution, especially air and light pollution. The picture is not of one of my interlocutors, but a very important figure for the person I did interview in connection with this day. It's Reverend Ben Chavez of the United Churches of Christ during a 1983 protest against the dumping of toxic waste. The UCC, as I learned, really launched the movement against environmental racism, and it continues to expose and protest the inequitable impacts of pollution in the US. And my interlocutor there was Brooks Bount, who's the Creation Justice Ministry lead with UCC currently. On the fifth day, we have the emergence of winged and finned creatures from the ocean. And here my focus is on the degradation of wetlands and oceans. And here on this little fishing vessel in the middle is the fabulous Queen Elizabeth hare of Arusha, Kenya's marine conservation program. The sixth day sees the emergence of land animals and, of course, the creation of human beings. And here my focus is on a critique of human chauvinism and the mistreatment of our kindred creatures, both directly and indirectly through the destruction of their life world. And the book I'm featuring here was written by Christina Nellis, whom I interviewed, and she was the co-founder of Plan Orthodox Concern for Animals, and she commissioned this beautiful icon of Christ breaking the bonds of animal suffering. And the seventh day, generally not included in the hexameral tradition, but in my reading, it's crucial because the whole narrative culminates not in the creation of human beings, but in an invitation to join in festive celebration of the communion of creatures. And here I discuss this in connection with the Jewish Green Sabbath movement, but also with respect to a very inspired creative project undertaken by the Earth Justice team at St. James's Piccadilly in the heart of London. So, and the image, of course, here is the one I use on the front page of my book. I was very pleased to get permission to use this. It's by the Australian artist Leonard French, and it's from his series on the seven days of creation from the mid-1960s. And this is the seventh day when, as he puts it, all the days become one and everything was alive on the earth. Okay, so that's a rough overview of the structure and some of my major interlocutors in the book. Now, turning to the topic of this talk, the question of the theology, perhaps even the ecotheology of the Hexameron. One of the first things that I had to grapple with was the status of the primary written text to which I was responding. For the commentators from late antiquity and the Middle Ages, this was taken to have been written under divine inspiration by Moses, understood as one of the prophets. It was a sacred text with an abiding truth value. As I soon discovered, however, this did not mean that they understood it as literally true. This is something that I, in my naivety, found really interesting and surprising. They did not take it to be true in the sense of an empirically verifiable account of how the natural world came to be. On the contrary, they all start from what might be called an apophatic hermeneutic, a hermeneutic of negativity. That is to say, with the assumption that no mere mortal could ever discern definitively what this mysterious text is all about. And the tone was set by the first century classically educated Jewish philosopher, Philo of Alexandria, whose Hexameron was actually very influential among later Christian commentators who generally don't acknowledge his influence. Philo observed that, quote, this account of the creation of the cosmos transcends our capacity of speech and of hearing, being too great and august to be adjusted to the tongue or ear of any mortal. Similarly, Augustine insisted with respect to his own hesitant explications. He says, well, it might be this or it might be that, and I'm not sure, and who knows. Anyway, he says, quote, none of these things should be rashly asserted, but they should all be discussed tentatively and with moderation. And at the height of the medieval revival of the hexameral tradition, Abelard and Eloise fame, Abelard, having been asked by Eloise and her nuns to provide an interpretation of Genesis 1, ends his introductory comments by saying that he's bound to make a hash of it, exclaiming, I am made a fool, you compel me to do it. Well, in fact, most of these earlier commentators assumed that the scriptural narrative could be read in a variety of ways, and all acknowledged that its meaning could not be pinned down definitively. Origen of Alexandria, for example, distinguished three levels of meaning: a literal bodily sense, a figurative soul or psychic sense, principally concerned with moral edification, and an allegorical or spiritual sense. Origen argued that there was much in scripture that simply did not make sense literally, and that such impossibilities functioned as a prompt to look instead for subterranean spiritual significance. In his commentary on Genesis 1, he acknowledges the importance of the literal level, that is to say, references to the actual more than human things of creation, along with the second level of moral significance. But he's clearly far more excited about the potential for allegorical explication, such that, for example, the sun, moon, and stars of the fourth day are interpreted as foreshadowing, respectively, the coming of Christ as the light of the world, the church illuminated by Christ, and the patriarchs and prophets, the stars in us, as he called them. Here, Origen's allegorizing also conforms to what Augustine later called the analogical approach, whereby texts from the Old Testament are made to speak to the new, as in by analogy, you see. A particularly extreme version of this form of what some might consider Christian appropriation of the Hebrew scriptures, rendered even more troubling by its liberal sprinkling of chilling anti-Judaic asides, can be seen in Anastasius of Sinai's Hexameron from the sort of late 600s of the current era, which reads Genesis 1 exclusively as an anticipation of the incarnation, the formation of the church, and the coming redemption. Well, among those who pursue what became known as the literal level of interpretation, not literalistic, but literal in the sense of referring to the world beyond the text, if you like, they all make a clear distinction between the prophetic vision of divine creative agency in this narrative and purely naturalistic accounts. That is to say, they don't mistake it for what was at the time referred to as natural philosophy or natural history. And they take its truth value to be of a different kind from that which is afforded by empirical observation. Augustine in particular is explicit that the attribution of the coming into being of different parts of creation to different days of the week was simply a poetic device to make the whole shebang more comprehensible to simple minds. Biblical literalism is, of course, a 19th century heresy. You don't find it in the tradition. In their meditations on creation beyond the text, that is to say, on the natural world as it discloses itself to human observation in the here and now, many do nonetheless enter into conversation with and often draw on the natural philosophies and natural histories of their day. Basil, for example, would have none of Origen's allegorizing. Without naming Origen directly, he targets in particular his dualistic construction of the waters placed above and below the firmament on the second day, as symbolizing respectively the good powers of those pure of soul, by contrast with those wicked spirits who from their natural height have fallen into the abyss of evil. Basil exclaims, "Let us reject these theories as dreams and old women's tales. Let us understand that by water, water is meant, And he subsequently reiterates, for me, grass is grass. Plant, fish, wild beasts, domestic animals, I take all in the literal sense. Or seeking to revalue the manifold things of creation in their own right, Basil nonetheless also reads with a view to moral edification, not only by commending the contemplation of the ineffable wisdom manifest in all of creation, but also by observing how the habits of particular creatures provide lessons for the cultivation of virtue among humans. In his account of these habits, he draws on several classical sources, in particular the 1st century natural history of Pliny the Elder. Among the observed traits of other creatures that Basil holds up as exemplars for humans are the wisdom and industry of honeybees, the cooperative life of cranes, the care for the elderly of storks, the marital fidelity of turtle doves, and the friendly conviviality of bats. And whilst his listeners are admonished not to emulate the crafty camouflage adopted by the squid to entrap its prey, Basil observes with respect to the sure sense for self-preservation and the perpetuation of their own kind manifest in fish, that humans are inclined, quote, to be less reasonable about our affairs than the fish. So, in engaging with my predecessors in the Hexameron tradition, I quickly discovered that I shared with them an appreciation of the unpinned down ability of the text and its openness to a variety of different modes of interpretation. I also discerned that the readings I was particularly interested in were precisely those that took this written text as an invitation to contemplate the vastly more than human world into which we, as a particular kind of land animal, had arrived only relatively lately, and to do so, moreover, with an attentiveness to other sources of knowledge about it beyond the biblical. In my own case, those other sources of knowledge include contemporary natural sciences, but also indigenous ecological knowledge, aesthetic imagination, and my own personal experience. Where I differ is principally in 2 respects. Firstly, with regard to the status of the text, and secondly, with regard to the state of the earth. Well, on the first point, in the wake of over 2 centuries of modern biblical scholarship, I clearly differ from the ancient and medieval assumption that, that this was penned by Moses, and rather I share the current majority view that the original Hebrew text was probably redacted by one or more priestess scholars during or probably shortly after the exile of the Jewish elite to Babylon in the 5th to 6th centuries before the Common Era, but that it incorporates a much earlier narrative, possibly going right back to the 9th century, as indicated by the reference to God in the plural form, Elohim, and possibly drawing on yet older oral traditions. So not unlike the 18th century German philosopher Herder, one of the forefathers of modern biblical studies, who wrote a really beautiful essay on Genesis 1, I take this to be a poetic rendering of a mythic narrative, one amongst a vast many such creation stories that can be found in the cultural inheritance of human societies the world over. Now, importantly for me, unlike modern scientific accounts, such creation stories are concerned not so much with the physical processes of cosmogenesis as with questions of meaning, value, and purpose. These are fundamental questions as to why we are here. What are we good for? What's our purpose? How should we relate to others? These are questions that properly lie outside the remit of the natural sciences. And in that respect, such creation stories are not rendered redundant by advances in scientific knowledge. Science on its own is no good substitute for these older tales, although it might well inform how we categorize and interpret them, as indeed is the case in my own Hexameron. Well, traditional creation stories are wondrously many and varied, but they share one crucial feature. They all imagine human beings being brought into a world that was not of their own making. What then are we to make of such narratives in an era when that is no longer entirely the case? An era that geologists, not unproblematically, have named the Anthropocene. And this brings me, of course, to the second way in which my approach to the biblical creation story is fundamentally different from that of my predecessors in the Hexameron tradition. For all of those who approach it with a view to its literal reference in the world beyond the page, Genesis 1 afforded an opportunity for the celebration of the natural world, and in particular the abundance and variety of living creatures that came to populate the realms of air, water, and land. And Basil is particularly effusive in this regard. I fell totally in love with Basil. Addressing a congregation composed largely of artisans in the Basilica of Cappadocia in 378 of the current era, Basil exhorts his listeners to lift their gaze from things of merely human manufacture and behold instead the incomprehensible splendor and multitudinous marvels of earth, sea, and sky. Again and again, he remarks how his discourse had run away with him, yet also how far his words fell short of conveying the unspeakable wondrousness of the living world, of the astonishing abundance and variety of living things birthed by the land in response to the divine call. He exclaims, "What shall I say? What shall I leave unsaid? In the rich treasures of creation, it's difficult to select what is most precious, the omission of which is most severe. Summoned forth by a loving creator and the object of his continued care, all things, he proclaims, appeared to be united in one universal sympathy. Together, they composed a harmonious symphony in which even the waters of the deeps sing in their language a harmonious hymn to the glory of the Creator within the universal choir of creation." Well, reading the Hexameron tradition launched by Basil in the horizon of mass species extinction, toxic pollution, climate disruption, and ecological unraveling turned out to be a profoundly painful experience. For where these earlier commentators celebrate the incredible abundance and diversity of living beings, each delighting in their existence after their own kind, we look out upon depletion, diminishment, and unspeakable suffering. And where they rejoice in the rhythm of the seasons and the fecundity of sea and land, we're faced with weather patterns that are becoming ever weirder and the disabling of Earth's capacity to sustain those complex connectivities that enable collective flourishing. However, rereading this tradition is immensely painful for another reason as well. Namely, in view of the subsequent weaponization of this very creation story to legitimate destructive technologies, extractivist economies, and imperialistic polities. Why I think it's valuable, though, is that within this tradition, there's actually quite a nuanced take on the human place in the scheme of things, and one that's far from endorsing the construction of dominion as domination. Basil was extremely reluctant to speak of his own kind. He says, "I know you're all waiting to hear about the making of humans, but I really find it very difficult to talk about my own kind." And he actually broke off his homilies after the passage that refers to the making of the first humans, but prior to the verses that define their place in creation in terms of sovereignty and mastery. Other commentators, though, were not so coy. Among them was Basil's younger brother, Gregory of Nyssa, who was concerned that Basil hadn't talked sufficiently about the making of man. So he wrote a whole book on the subject. And here he frames humans as the king for whom God had furnished on earth a royal lodging. Construing creation as culminating on day 6 with the making of our own kind, many commentators attempted to read all that went before as solely for the benefit of humanity, thereby attributing to creation what I call an anthropic telos. Even Philo, for whom the narrative ends only on day 7, even Philo is led to surmise that God desired that on coming into the world, man might at once find both a banquet and a most sacred display, nourishment, that is, for both body and mind. A common thread in the theology of the Hexameron, then, is that creation is oriented from the start towards the making of humankind as a culmination of the whole thing. And this thought leads Philo to fantasize how this sudden appearance of man must have caused the other animals to be amazed and to do homage to him as to a born ruler and master. Even Thomas Traherne, who's second only to Basil in his evident delight in the natural world, is drawn to declare that man is the sum and end of all creatures. The rest of the creatures were without a head. They were worthless before because they served nothing and were to no purpose. I virtually wept, I certainly swore when I read comments such as these and wrote yuck and even worse things in my notes. Well, in light of the damage that was licensed by this view of our own kind as a sum and end of all creatures, the masterwork, the end of all yet done, as we read in Milton's Paradise Lost, it's hard to avoid the conclusion that this creation narrative was and remains an extremely dangerous religious inheritance. Well, in recent years, many biblical scholars have indeed brought an ecological hermeneutic to this and other inconvenient biblical texts, as Hebrew Bible scholar Norman Harbel has termed those passages, of which there are many, that might strike contemporary readers as profoundly problematic. This is a hermeneutic which, as Anne Elvey so beautifully phrases it in her new book, entails a mode of reading with earth as habitat, agent, judge, attentive to the cry of earth in this moment, and oriented towards decolonizing human relations, both with one another and with other kind. Well, in keeping with this approach, I want to draw out some of the strands of the Hexameral tradition that provide an important qualification to its human exceptionalist tendencies. So to begin with, none of the Hexameral writers doubt the inherent worth of other creatures in themselves, and several stress that our differentiation from them is partial rather than absolute. Augustine is perhaps most explicit about human kinship with other animals, attributing to his own kind, quote, both a certain connection with and a distinction from the animals. On the one hand, the text, says man was made on the same day as the beasts. They are all of them land animals, after all. Augustine had no problem at all about proclaiming that human beings too were animals, land animals specifically. But then he goes on to say, on the other hand, because of the preeminence of reason, the narrative speaks separately about humans. With the sole exception of the Anglo-Saxon commentator Elfric, at least among those whom I study closely, the Hexameral writers presuppose that all living beings are ensouled, whilst nonetheless distinguishing between different kinds of soul, most commonly amongst vegetal, animal, and human souls, with the latter qualified, as we've seen in Augustine, as uniquely rational and or immortal. Abelard unusually makes a further distinction along gendered lines, suggesting that whereas both men and women are like God in their possession of an immortal soul, the former, men, more fully embody the imago Dei in their superior faculty of reason. And I was prompted to wonder what Eloise and her sisters might have made of that. Perhaps they would have thought, well, he has indeed made a hash of the whole thing. In any case, some commentators trace our continuities with other creatures along a scale of increasing complexity. Philo, for example, notes that the account of the creation of animals begins with what he takes to be the least elaborately worked out-ish, before the day of the microscope, of course, and proceeds to those, quote, worked out in the greatest detail, which he takes to be human beings. with this growing complexity corresponding to greater levels of awareness and what he terms the life principle. Along similar lines, Grosseteste links such degrees of liveliness to the capacity for self-willed movement, observing that the sequence of nature goes up by sort of series of steps, by the properties of life from lower things to more perfect things. Similarly, Grosseteste maintained that human likeness to the Creator was merely a matter of degree. God is all things in all things, the life of living things, the form of things with form, the species of things with species, and human beings are in all things God's closest likeness and resemblance. Well, this count, of course, still privileges humans who appear as a combination of creation within the medieval great chain of being. For John the Scot, too, the last day is, quote, a climax, with humans manifesting understanding like an angel, reasoning like a man, sensing like an animal, and living like a plant. Yet he adds that even the lowliest body, a stone, for example, is not wholly devoid of life, although we cannot discern it. Every creature then is either living in itself or participating in life in some fashion. And as he implies, and as William Blake will much later assert, everything that lives is holy. Moreover, whilst all creatures are understood to be inherently good in themselves, each bearing witness to divine wisdom, creative agency, and loving kindness, some commentators also stress that they are interconnected in such a way as to compose something that's more than the sum of its parts. As Grosseteste puts it, all things are woven together in a highly ordered way by natural connections, such that any creature then, so long as it preserves the good in which it was created, is good in itself without qualification, is good in itself without qualification. In its relation to the ordering of the whole, it is better. The whole is very good. However variously defined, it is the unique possession of a particular kind of soul or mind that's commonly identified as entitling humans to the dominion vouchsafed in Genesis 1:26. Now, this in turn poses some interpretive challenges, considering the extent to which some creatures do not, in fact, appear to serve human interests or obey our rules. Basil takes a decidedly non-anthropocentric view of this, maintaining that all has not been created in view of the wants of our bellies, and that things which are harmful to humans afford nourishment for other creatures. This was a view emphatically echoed by Ambrose. Others, like Augustine, are at pains to explain away the evident fact that there's much in nature that resists our sway, not least those beasts for whom we ourselves are prey, as a consequence of the fall. Anastasius takes a different tack, reasoning that the evident counterfactuality of human dominion points to the non-literal meaning of this passage and indeed of the whole creation narrative. Adama here refers not to ordinary human beings, but exclusively to Jesus Christ, to whom alone all creatures are subject. Even where human sovereignty is applauded, it's generally carefully qualified. In Philo's reading, the Creator made man after all things as a sort of driver or pilot to drive and steer the things on earth, and charged him with the care of animals and plants, like a governor subordinate to the chief and great king. Here Philo construes human sovereignty in keeping with ancient Hebraic notions of kingship as entailing brotherly care for subject peoples. For Traherne, echoing a call to self-restraint found also amongst the Eastern Church Fathers in particular, our earthly rule was to be exercised with thankfulness, wise consideration, and moderation, lest we forfeit God's eternal mercies, either by sinful ingratitude, stupid heedlessness, or inordinate love or excess in the use of any of these other creatures. For they are all given to us conditionally, and we're called to render to all creatures in thee and for thee their due esteem. It is, of course, these constraints that were soon to be swept away with the rapid advance of fossil-fueled industrial modernity, leaving the Christian inheritance of human exceptionalism unqualified by earlier notions of care and esteem to become secularized into the modernist project of techno-scientific mastery over and economic exploitation of a resource-rich realm of mindless matter. Yet, as mentioned previously, the Hexameron tradition, for all its nuances, had one fatal flaw: the assumption that the creation culminated with the making of man. And in this respect, Philo totally got what most of his Christian successors forgot. The story of creation reaches its end, which is also a new beginning, only on the seventh day, which he extols rather beautifully as a festival, not of a single city or country, but of the universe. Pondering the peculiarity of the double completion of creation, if the work of creation was finished on the sixth day, why does Genesis 2:2 state that it was brought to completion on the seventh? Later rabbinic commentators came to the conclusion that something new was indeed brought into being in the godly silence of this day. And according to the medieval Rabbi Rashi, as eco-theologian Norman Worsber explains, what was left unfinished was creation's purpose, which is why on the seventh day, God created manua, a term we can translate as the tranquility, serenity, and peace of God. What this communicates is the happiness and contentment that come from experiencing and knowing that things are as they ought to be, and that they are primordially and constitutively good. What this teaches is that the point and purpose of creaturely life is for it to be cherished and celebrated. And so my Hexameron too returns to the Jewish origins of the genre and concludes with the meditation on the all-important seventh day. Here, though, if I've got another couple of minutes, I would like to finish by bringing before you an even more radical recasting of this narrative, one that goes beyond reinterpretation to undertake a rewording of the biblical text in accordance with what is thought to have been earlier, less hierarchical strands of the Hebrew scriptures, and in line with Australian Indigenous understandings of the human place in the sacred order of the land community, called country in Aboriginal English. And perhaps if you haven't picked up from my accent, I am actually Australian. And so this is something that is very dear to my heart, really this quite profound reimagination of this biblical text through Indigenous Australian perspective. So this then is the decolonizing translation of the biblical account of the sixth and seventh days of creation that was undertaken by Norm Harble, already mentioned, with Aboriginal theologian Anne Patel Gray in conversation with other Aboriginal elders. And this is the land creates life. Then God said, let the land bring forth life, each according to its kind, animals, creeping creatures, and land life according to its kind. And it happened. So God made the life of the land, each according to its kind, animals and creeping creatures according to their kind. And God saw that it was good. Then the wind, the creative spirit, said to the land, you have brought forth many land beings. Let us now together make human beings in our image, male and female, and let their nature reflect both land and spirit. And let them be at peace with their kindred land beings, and let them be custodians of the land. And it happened. Then the wind blessed the human land beings and said, it is very good. Then God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed, which is upon the face of the land, and every tree with seed in its fruit. And you shall have them for food, and to every animal of the land, and to every bird of the sky, and to everything that creeps on the land, everything that has the breath of life. I have given every green plant food. And it happened. God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. The sky and the land were completed, and all their living host. And when God completed the work which he had done, he rested. So God blessed the day he rested and made it sacred, because on it God rested from all his created work. These are the origins of the sky and the land when they were transformed. So here, in what I take to be a particularly striking instance of the decolonization of Christianity that is gathering pace globally, creation is recalibrated as country, a multi-species collective comprising the living and the dead, biotic and abiotic entities, land and sky, air and waters. All reference to power relations has been removed from verses 26 to 28, and humans thereby restored to the status of participants in, rather than the purpose of, the wider communion of creatures. Participants who have significant custodial responsibilities, tasked with duties of care, to be sure, but no longer as conquering overlords. And with that, I will finish. Thank you very much for your attention. And I will stop screen sharing.
Wow, that was magnificent, Kate. Thank you so much. What a treat. I assume you can hear me? Everybody can hear me? Okay, good. Wow. And what a beautiful rewording, reimagining of Genesis. Thank you so much for closing with that as well. And I'm feel so privileged that I get to be first in saying a few words, a question perhaps for you before turning it over to the larger circle. You see, I've got all kinds of notes. I have to make sense of the notes. So first of all, your approach, I love your own hermeneutic, which my little diagram here is a kind of mandala that you embodied with the text and context as one axis, and then the personal and the planetary the other axis. So that's how I see the mandala of your own hermeneutic engagement with this tradition and your creative extension of it, and organic flowering, your continuing flowering of this tradition. The first thing that occurred to me, well, right at the beginning, I know you're familiar with Blake's phrase from Laocoon, I think, that the Bible is the great code of art and literature. Northrop Frye, and others, and I've taken up that phrase as well to suggest that in many ways, scholars such as Hegel and Levitt and others, Karl Levitt, have suggested that the Bible is not only the great code of art and literature, but it somehow can be seen as having provided a ground plan, symbolic, mythopoeic, archetypal ground plan for the evolution of Western and then planetary culture, including secularization and so on, and which has brought us to this point, as you shared with us today, this point of planetary crisis, of mass extinction, which, although in some sense prefigured in the last book of the Bible, in Apocalypse, we are now in the planetary situation in which we find ourselves, we who may not consider ourselves to be, let's say, fundamentalist Christians, don't have the benefit or the consolation, if that's what it is, of being able to lean back on the older pre-modern interpretation of the Bible and its great code as providing a kind of framework for, as you put it, meaning, value, and purpose that might help us make sense or come to terms with the apocalyptic character of our own times. So I'm wondering, my first question for you is, since I don't assume or I assume, but perhaps I'm wrong, I assume that you are not personally you do not hold to a literal metaphysical reading of the biblical narrative in terms of its telos, particularly not only creation, but the other pole, apocalypse, New Jerusalem, and so on. So if you don't have that, what do you have, or what might we have in a postmodern, postmodern context relative to this great code? Like what is the ground and telos of the meaning, value, and purpose in this context? So if that's coherent, I have a follow-up, but I'd like to see what you might say to that.
Thanks very much, Sean. I guess the first thing that I would say is that I would differ from Blake. I agree with Blake about lots of things, but I differ from Blake in that it's not the codex or code, it's a code. Or at least it's actually more than that, because of course the Bible is as the early German Romantics discerned, a compendium. It's a compendium of all kinds of different texts in different genres, written in different times, in different contexts. In fact, there's a kind of diversity, I think, as we know from great works of biblical scholarship and theology, great diversity of images of God and understandings of the human place in the scheme of things. And there are lots of contradictory trajectories, I think, coming out of the Bible. So that would be the first thing that I would say, that it's not a code and that there are diverse trajectories. And for me, it's really important to relativize the Bible in that way. With respect to, sort of the current moment and where one might look to a sense of meaning in the amidst the kind of unfolding calamity, I guess one thing that just springs to mind immediately is that I was very struck that that Orbis, not long before they published my book, published Catherine Keller's book on Revelation, I guess my own hermeneutic approach to that. So here's my book on the first book of the Bible, and Catherine's on the last one. My own sort of hermeneutic with respect to Revelation would be very similar to Catherine's, I guess I would want to. I mean, my fundamental understanding is that just as the creation narrative doesn't refer to a particular moment in time, similarly, apocalypse does not refer to a particular moment in time. Although in world history, we might approach something cataclysmic, but it's more. I understand Revelation more as an exhortation to be continuously endeavoring to, in our small, limited ways, bring forth ever more fully the kingdom, or as I prefer, the kingdom of God. And that's a project, I think, in which Christians can join with folks of other faiths, and indeed none. So yeah, definitely to have a very kind of non-literalist sort of view. However, I guess, you know, the shadow hanging over the book, and indeed much of my work for many years, including my earlier book, Dancing with the Disaster, is a sense that that we are really on a very calamitous trajectory. you know, sometimes find it very hard to discern how we're going to turn the ship around. Therefore, this was one of the reasons why I realized if this was not just going to be a work of lamentation as a counterpart to all those earlier Hexameron, which were works of sort of celebration, if it wasn't just going to be lamentation, I actually had to get some hope myself, get a little bit of hope myself by linking up with these remarkable people and their organizations who are doing that work bit by bit of, you know, endeavoring to hold open the possibility of an ongoing and perhaps renewed flourishing of life on Earth. So that's probably not a very satisfactory answer, but that's the best I can do for the time being, Sean.
No, that's a great answer. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, particularly your decision to highlight the seventh day and the emphasis that your reading of the seventh day as an invitation not only of celebration but of active engagement in the renewal, the constitution and reconstitution of the whole Earth community, if we could put it that way. And what it seemed to me that your appeal there is so resonant with, let's say, the Earth Charter, and with the emerging field and call for integral ecologies. I like to say it in the plural, but of course the most prominent one at the moment is Pope Francis's version of an integral ecology. So this would be another question, how you might see your work, and this work in particular, as intersecting with, drawing from, or helping people who are already engaged in with the Earth Charter and with the project of integral ecology.
Thank you. Yes, that is, of course, very dear to my heart. And also, I mean, the other sort of really exciting thing is that that there is a whole kind of multi and interfaith push around this as well. And of course, most recently, we've had this very profound Islamic statement that is a kind of counterpart to Laudato Si in some respects, and very powerful statements from other church or other religious leaders as well. Yeah, I guess I hope that it will just be a little kind of little current that will feed into all of that, and also although you know, I'm speaking out of and primarily towards a kind of Christian tradition, broadly understood. It was really important to me also to be very much in conversation with Jewish thinkers and activists, and going back to your earlier question, I kind of been very struck by something that Rabbi Jonathan Karen Black says actually in a prayer in the Australian Progressive Jewish Prayer Book, that we have left it late to awaken. His theology is very much that with respect to kind of apocalyptic narratives, that God, he prefers the term the universal spirit. Now he finds God far too patriarchal concept, but the universal spirit needs human beings to participate in sort of averting the worst, if that is possible, and that we can't wait on some kind of divine intervention. Sorry, I've kind of muddled up your questions there, but yes, I do see this as sort of hopefully sort of tying in with that. The other thing that, I mean, I don't think that my book's likely to be read by well, let me put it more positively. I suspect that this book is probably going to principally appeal to sort of eco-oriented, sort of liberal Christians. But it did seem to me important to demonstrate to those for whom tradition is important, that a non-literalist approach to the Bible is traditional. You know, goes all the way back to church fathers, that is traditional. And secondly, that it is traditional to honor creation. And certainly that, you know, the idea that the you know, biblical warrant to human beings to have dominion justifies you know, mountaintop mining is totally anathema, really, to this earlier line of thinking. This is really a modernist, I would say, heresy. Within it, I say this ironically to some degree, but I think that was important to me as well, that maybe that there are resources there for people to say, hey, you know, if they're having a debate with people who would take a different view, look, this is actually part of the tradition. It's been forgotten.
Yeah, I very much appreciated your retrieval of that core. I mean, the creation spirituality, which is not only a countercurrent. I think you're right in characterizing it as, in fact, central from the beginning until relatively recent in our tradition. Yeah, I you know, in with the prospect of regardless of whether or not we're able to, in fact, avert the worst, what I see you inviting us towards is, in Christian terms, a metanoia, is an experience, an experience of a radical turning and waking up of the heart mind, not only to the gravity of our situation, but to, in your reading of Menuha, to the possibility of waking up to and choosing what we know in our heart minds to be good and true. So we have this fundamental existential, ethical, spiritual choice in our hands now, regardless of outcome. We can affirm life, we can be with life, or not. And that is, it's a responsibility. It's a great gift. So this is what I'm getting from your highlighting of this seventh day is the wow, here we are. We can now look back. We can now really take stock, and we can link arms, and we can affirm our interbeing with life, or not. And this is, you know, it's a great responsibility, but it's a great gift as well. So
absolutely, it's a responsibility, it's a gift, but it's also a joy. And you know, I really love Philo's you know, festive. It's a festive affirmation of solidarity. And solidarity is an important term for me here. Our solidarity with our kindred creatures on this earth. And so the week is bookended for me by contemplation as the starting point. And of course, this is not an idea, it's a practice, the practice of contemplation. And at the end, celebration, which returns to contemplation in a kind of new vein, if you like, and with joy. And one thing, apropos of what you were saying, regardless of outcomes, this is something that really struck me. With in my research, I don't really go into it very much, but in my research, I also spent some time with Christian Climate Action in the UK, which is the kind of Christian wing of Extinction Rebellion in the UK. And what one of the most eloquent members of Christian Climate Action, who's also a lawyer actually by training, says frequently, and I think this is a great gift of that you have as an activist with a faith perspective. She says, for us as Christians, we don't have to be successful. It doesn't hinge on being successful. It's about doing the right thing. It's about bearing witness, responding to the call, being putting our bodies on the line. And actually, also really interestingly, I discovered that that contemplative practices are absolutely crucial in the training of those Christian climate activists for non-violent direct action, so that they really learn to be very mindful when they're participating in protest actions, that they don't get drawn into antagonism with the police, for example, or indeed with, you know, passers-by who might be critical of what they're doing, and so on. And so this contemplative practice of really working through your own stuff and really trying to distance yourself from the negative emotions of anger and indeed despair, while acknowledging them as well, but not being driven by them. This is all really important. But yeah, that thing that it's not about being successful, it's about sort of like really doing the right thing, acting in loving solidarity here and now, and yeah, stepping out in faith, as they would say, and knowing that it's not all in our hands as well. That's great kind of you know, our individually or even our collectively, that enables a kind of peacefulness in the midst of it all, in the midst of the deep sadness and anguish and indeed anger.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, I have another metaphysical question, but a more metaphysical question, but I'll hold off. Maybe this is a good time to let the audience in, and if there is time, I'll ask you that final question, but I'll resist right now. Thank you so much, Kate.
Yeah, there is a question that has come in. If it's okay, maybe I'll just read it. Could you perhaps talk a bit more about teleology or teleology as a humanist religious project? Teleology is something other than historicizing. What would the construction of a creaturely worldview would mean for the anthropocentric need to teleologize? The seventh day seems to figuratively and momentarily do away with the need for a teleology. And if I can permit myself to maybe piggyback on this question, you've spoken a little bit about like your work with environmental activists, and your inclusion of the seventh day into this tradition is obviously one of the distinguishing factors, you know, of your work. Just wondering if you, Jonathan Schorsch from the Green Sabbath Initiative, I know is based there in Germany at the University of Potsdam. Not sure if you have had a chance to dialogue or not, but yeah, just to piggyback on that.
Thanks very much, and hi, Sayali. It's nice to see you in this context. We know each other from the University of Cologne.
Hi, Professor.
This, of course, is a challenging question, and I guess in a sense I'm wary of teleology. This is what I was touching on with respect to the question of you know, how I respond to the last book of the Christian Bible, a Revelation, which obviously has seems to have a strongly kind of teleological orientation, and of course that teleology gets kind of secularized through German Romantic philosophy, through Hegel and Marx, as some kind of inevitable kind of unfolding of an ultimately redemptive history. So that's not a faith that I share. I understand the future to be radically open and uncertain. I don't see any inevitable drift within history or within creation. But I would have a kind of, if you like, a minimalist teleology, at least when I am wearing a more personal mantle of faith, which is that I have, as I say, personally, this is not as a scholar, as a historian, a philosopher, but personally, on a good day, I have faith in the possibility that creation is tilted towards enhanced collective flourishing of a kind that is ultimately sustained by love. So I would have a kind of minimalist teleology, which is not a sure belief, but a kind of faithful hope in the power of love to do surprising things. Let me just put it that way. Even in the most seemingly dire of circumstances, that there is something that exceeds the human emotion of love, something that is maybe built into creation, that is oriented towards love. That's my personal answer to that question. And I'm intrigued by what you say about the seventh day seems to figuratively and momentarily do away with the need for teleology. And yeah, I like that. Would you like to make any further comment on that yourself? I really like that idea. I wish I'd have thought of that myself.
Okay, I'm flattered. Sorry about not being able to turn on my camera. Things are pretty chaotic, and it's just as well that all the other participants mostly also have their cameras off. It really was a spur of the moment observation that kind of occurred to me while you and Dr. Kelly were having your dialogue just shortly before. And it's a way of symbolizing or reading into things, perhaps, which is the larger undertaking, but it seems to be a more optimistic or a more hopeful way of doing it, because there seems to be a precedent for it that we can look towards, that we can look back and spot. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, you're quite right. I mean, there's a sense precisely in which the Sabbath is the day in which we glimpse more fully the promise of peace and well-being and loving interrelationship. That's what the celebration of the Sabbath should be. And the crucial thing is to understand that as extended beyond the human. And indeed, Charlie, it is Jonathan's Green Sabbath project. I do reference in that final chapter. And actually, since then, he and I have indeed been in discussion. And we are very, very slowly, very, very gently working on a little project of putting together a collection of Green Sabbath poems. So if anybody has got any Green Sabbath poems that they would like to send our way, do please do so.
Charlie, if there's not another quite well, we should wait a minute in case somebody was just about to ask. But if somebody doesn't ask, I wanted to follow up on that.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a small enough group here. You know, you feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself. Otherwise, I certainly have plenty of questions, and I know Dr. Kelly, you have one more as well too. So
Yeah, well, if I may then, first of all, I just thank you for sharing your more personal view of things, and I really get what you say on a good day. I really get that, but it's deeply resonant with my own position, so I'm very grateful for that. This has to do with telos. So Sayali's question, but related. So I like one view of telos is like inevitable sort of goal, but I see another reading of telos and teleos as wholeness and potential, but also as purpose or lure. And I'm wondering, I would love to hear you if you have any thoughts on how that might relate to not necessarily the Hegelian view or Marxist view of history, but the romantic Naturphilosophie, which I don't know whether you bring this up in your book, but which is, as you know, a cosmogenetic variant on the great chain of being, but that is teleological in that sense. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess well, I love much in romantic Naturphilosophie, particular fan of Schelling, also Goethe as a contributor to that as well. Where again I'm kind of a little bit wary where Schelling and Coleridge really take on this idea of a kind of inevitability in the kind of telos of creation. So I guess I'm a little bit more Darwinian probably, and I see it as you know as more haphazard in a sense. But what is important, I think, and this is where it really links up with this Hexameron tradition, is that sense of telos as a kind of inherent tendency within individual living beings. And one of the things that that I really value is their emphasis upon having, as Traherne puts it, due esteem for the inherent telos of other creatures, that they have their own way of being in the world and their own impulse towards the good life according to their own kind, and that humans are called to respect that. And this would be an argument, for example, against you know, intensive animal husbandry, which completely denies that the telos of the creatures, you know, their desire to have freedom of movement and you know, fresh air and clean water and not to be overcrowded and all that kind of thing. And that's really quite strongly there. I guess the kind of a later variant of that, which also gets taken up in romantic philosophy, is the Spinozan sense of the conatus of things. I think really this is, in a sense, you know, when they talk about all these different critters, they marvel at all their different ways and their different forms of interrelationship and so on. You could sort of scan that as a kind of Spinozan conatus, which obviously links up also with sort of 20th century, 21st century process theologies. Yeah.
Great. Well, I hope we have a chance to pursue this further. I'll see if anybody else is going to come in these last few minutes.
What about you, Charlie?
Sure. I mean, first of all, there are a number of things you really said that I really want to sit with, for a little bit. Some of these lines, like creation is recalibrated as country. Yeah, just really struck really hard. And yeah, so thank you for that. I'd like to maybe ask you about the apophatic hermeneutic you talked about. And what's the relationship between that and the freedom we have to break from tradition and decolonize the biblical creation narrative? I hope I'm understanding that, but you talked about how sometimes the meaning can elude our understanding. I'll maybe bring in a little, I think this is Rashi actually, but the point that, Bereshit bara Elohim et Hashemayim ve'et haaretz, the opening line of Genesis, there's a shva under the bet, which grammatically essentially is, there's no definite article. So it's kind of like in a beginning. And this is like supportive of a lot you were talking about, of things like not necessarily being entirely literal, not literally true. So I don't know if that's supportive of the sort of apophatic hermeneutic, but if you can talk about what essentially gives us permission to be creative with our interpretation.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for that recollection of Rashi as well, because in fact, I guess, I'm by no means an expert on this, but my sense was that certainly the early church fathers are actually closer to a Jewish tradition of hermeneutics, where you assume that the biblical text is elusive, that nobody's going to have the last word on it. It actually also goes with a sort of a sense of the divine too, is of course ultimately elusive, and nobody can have the last word on what God is or is not. So as I say, I mean, in this sort of this genre that really gets developed in a particular kind of Christian tradition, that the first person who kind of does it is indeed Philo, the Jewish philosopher. And he sets the tone by saying, we don't really understand what that is. And then you've got Abelard saying, well, Lord knows what this means. I don't know what it means. Augustine's always saying, I don't know what this means. And also I love the way elsewhere in his writings, he said, well, I can't remember exactly what the critters are, but so I don't know why God created was it mosquitoes or something like that, or I don't know, flies and so on. He said, but are they not marvelous in themselves? There's this kind of hermeneutic modesty that is there in these church fathers, and it just seems to me rather astounding that got lost for historically contingent reasons, which with really, I think, quite pernicious consequences in the from the late 19th, 20th century. If we need permission to be free in our interpretations, we could say, well, the church fathers did it. Yeah, again, it's this. It is really just wanting to show the these dimensions of earlier completely orthodox Christian thought and writing that are really quite at odds with sort of 20th century kind of biblical literalist and fundamentalist readings.
Well, thank you very much. I think, you know, we're at time here. Professor Kelly, I mean, would you like to have the last word? Who wants to have the last word?
No, I'm very happy
Okay.
to have Kate have given those wonderful last words.
Well, I'll just say a few more by way of thanks. Thank you very much for the discussion and for the opportunity to share with you. And I hope to have more interchange with the California Institute as well. Really some great stuff that you're doing there. And it is indeed 9:30 in the evening here, which is not terribly late, but it's fairly late for me. So I'm quite happy to wrap up at this point.
Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you, Charlie, for organizing. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Professor Rigby, and thank you everyone for your time. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye. Hope to be in touch.
Bye. Yeah, very good. Okay, thanks.
Bye-bye.